This webinar is presented every month by the National Financial Security for All Community of Practice. We are a group of extension educators who work in the area of personal finance, education, and family resource management. And this webinar is designed for not just extension educators, but for any educators who work in that area with either adults or youth in personal finance education. And our topic today is about the FAFSA and how we can help educate parents and students about issues surrounding that. And we're really excited to have with us one of our own, Dr. Portia Johnson. Portia is the extension specialist and assistant professor. She comes from Alabama, and her programs do work with both youth adults. And this particular program hits both audiences as we are targeting both parents and students. So feel free to post questions in the Q&A as we go along today. I'll be monitoring that, and Dr. Johnson will be around for questions at the end of her presentation, and we'll have a little brief survey for you to respond to. So be sure and take the survey, our little evaluation survey, before you sign off today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Portia Johnson.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Megan, for having me here today. I'm really excited to share this, a review of a publication that was recently accepted into the Journal of Extension. This work is focused on a few years of research around the concept of the universal FAFSA as a policy that's sweeping the nation, and then what our state did in response to that policy being acted here in the state of Alabama. So before we start, I think Megan is going to share a quick poll with everybody, because I'm really interested to know more about what other extension services are doing in this area when it comes to college readiness or financial aid preparation. Okay, so there's not a lot happening in extension around this, so I hope that everyone learned some really cool stuff today, and maybe some tips or just small ways that you might think about engaging with this topic, especially considering the national conversation around student loan indebtedness and student loan repayment and workforce readiness. All of these things are really related to this topic of universal FAFSA policy, and really preparing people to be contributors to the workforce and to make decisions in their education that will help inform the rest of their lives and their learning potential and their accreditations. So I'm going to share my screen and get started. Megan, was there a second follow-up to that one? No, perfect. Okay. Here we go. So can everyone see my screen? It says Journal of Extension. Thank you, Megan. All right, so I am, like I said, my name is Dr. Portia Johnson. I am the state specialist here at Auburn University for financial education in the community. And this is a publication from work that we did related to universal FAFSA. And this publication is in the Journal of Extension. Its title is FAFSA Completion: Considerations for an Extension-Led Statewide Nudge Campaign. This is the citation itself, the direct citation. I did this work in collaboration with my then wonderful graduate student. She's put a lot of work into helping me just really do this annotated bib and understand this literature that's happening around the nation and the ways that extension is engaging with this work. And then also one of our lead extension field agents put a lot of work into helping this come to light as well. So that was the team. So a little bit about what the article entailed. As an overall, this work was really prompted by a mandate that came to the state of Alabama that's related to a concept called Universal FAFSA. And Universal FAFSA is an attempt by the U.S. Department of Education to encourage more people to, one, learn more about FAFSA, to become more informed about it, but also to nudge them and encourage them to complete FAFSA. Many states are enacting it in different ways, but here in the state of Alabama, it was enacted through a high school mandate placed for high school seniors that before graduation, they had to take a FAFSA action. And so that meant they had to either complete the FAFSA form or do a formal opt-out process from completion of that form. It basically just confirmed that they had looked into their options for FAFSA and they decided that was not the best option for them. That's what the opt-out essentially did. So if you don't know what FAFSA stands for, it is the free application for federal student aid. And so this publication, it really synthesized a lot of the current literature on FAFSA, its benefit to families, but more importantly, on these such policies that encourage people to complete FAFSA, and whether Extension had been engaging in some type of similar behaviors or activities in recent years. So in this research, like I said, we became the fourth state to have a universal FAFSA policy. And at the point that we became one of those states, there were already 7 others that had enacted the policies. And at that point, this was published, well, the research was done a year ago. At that point, there were 10 other states who were investigating or looking into whether they should enact something in their state legislature. Right now, since the publishing of this article, there are 12 states who have policies that are universal FAFSA, and there are still another 8 who are looking at ways or have enacted different policies. They didn't decide to go with the universal FAFSA approach. They maybe decided to do something else to encourage FAFSA completion, and so they chose a different route toward that end. So why does the federal government, the Board of Education, state leaders, why are they interested in helping students and families become more aware of FAFSA? School is expensive, right? So on average, a 4-year college or university costs about $20,000. Of course, if it's a private entity or college or university, those prices are going to go up. And if it is, for example, a 2-year program or a local college, community college, those costs will likely go down. But despite that, there is about $112 billion that the government sets aside for to help people to get certifications, to get college degrees, and the like, so that they can make meaningful contributions to the workforce and continue to contribute to our economy as a whole. There has been a decline, especially in rural areas, of having highly skilled workforce and having people for in-demand jobs. And so that becomes an issue that really dominoes into the strength of our economy, into people's ability to save for retirement, people's ability to afford housing, all of those things. Like if they aren't making adequate income and they don't have the skills to get those jobs, then they're really at a detriment conceivably for the rest of their lives. So this is a very important lever for the federal government, for people to, one, have access to post-secondary opportunities, but to also have informed decision-making about how they pay for those post-college activities. And so despite the fact that there's billions of dollars, 112 to 130, depending on the year, billions of dollars of aid for education, about 30 to 50% of students every year still don't apply for the aid. And so there's a lot of federal research around why that is. Why are students not applying for aid for which they qualify? Why are students not attending post-secondary opportunities for their futures? More importantly, why are they leaving over $3.5 billion every year on the table in free Pell Grants to go to 2-year programs, to go to 4-year programs? And many of them would be no cost to them, but allowed them to have high demand, high income earning jobs. Particularly in the state of Alabama, and why this became so important to me is because Alabama, like many southern states, don't often rise to the top of lists. Sometimes we really hang out at the bottom. And one area, especially since COVID, that has been a concern across the nation, really, but especially in Alabama, is the decline of students going to school, a post-secondary opportunity after they finish high school. That really declined during COVID, but it has continued to stay down, and that trend is not a good one. On the national stage, Alabama received some notable attention for our lack of white males who live in rural areas in Alabama, for the lack of them going to any post-secondary option, whether that be a 2-year or 4-year college. And that was picked up nationally by several outlets. And so that really caught my attention, and obviously the attention of leaders in our state. And a lot of people start to think about how that might be addressed and how we get more young people back into careers and technical degrees. One way to do that, as I started to dive into this research, is I came across the concept of something called a nudge campaign, an informational nudge. And so what a nudge is essentially something they call in the literature a choice architect, a type of intervention. And it does a few things. It's simple messaging that's very inexpensive to implement, so it wouldn't take much of a state or a federal budget to do it, or even a program budget, for example, our extension budget. It's also designed to lead or nudge people into acting in a predictable way, in a way that would benefit them or toward the outcome that you're trying to nudge them. It doesn't leave any option off the table. So, for example, it doesn't tell them that they have to do something or don't have to do something, or that if they were to do one thing that they couldn't do another. So it doesn't preclude them from taking the action they desire to take. And then lastly, it doesn't offer any significant incentives to people. So oftentimes when we do intervention testing or pilot programs, we offer incentives, right? We offer them $100 or something of the sort to take the action. But a nudge generally doesn't offer any significant incentive. It gives people information so they make informed decisions, and it really encourages them to make that decision, which is really very much in line with what we do in extension in general. We're providing informed information and moving people along from knowledge to eventually their behavioral change. So nudges can be a system one, meaning that it is a subtle push. So maybe just a one-time drop in the email, or a one-time communication with them, telling them about something or making them knowledgeable about it. Or it could be system two, which would require them to make an intentional action. So for example, in the state of Alabama, the FAFSA rule, our new FAFSA rule, is a system two. It requires high school students to either opt out or to complete the form. So they have to take an action, an intentional action. They have to intentionally look at FAFSA and make a decision for themselves. There is a good bit of literature around how nudges have been used, particularly related to financial education. Much of this work has been done with researchers who study financial aid or college readiness in some way, and then partnering with the federal government, whether it be the Board of Education, a funded project through the Board of Education, or whether it be a particular state entity or their university financial aid. So oftentimes these were partnerships. But what these nudges, this literature has found is that nudges are highly effective. And not only are they effective in this arena, but nudges have been used in a lot of different arenas beyond this financial aid work. But particularly for financial aid, it increased college aid applications and people attending post-secondary options. It increased them verifying their income and doing those steps that they need to do to enroll in a school, not just applying for the school, but actually getting over the hump of completing all those verifications. And then another research study found that high school seniors that were a part of this national campaign, and so this campaign was spearheaded by the Board of Education with the assistance from some researchers. It provided this concrete evidence that first-time generation college enrollment would increase if you target nudging to students who would be first gen. And then lastly, at the University of Virginia, they did a very specific nudge that encouraged their students to complete the full process of attending college. So in a lot of states and a lot of schools, beyond the FAFSA, there's a form called a CSS profile. And that is essentially used by schools to help streamline the financial aid process. And it's the tool that they use to award or assign aid to students once they get that FAFSA information. So that study was really instrumental and showed that doing that outreach, that nudge, encouraged the students to finish that profile so that they could qualify for more aid. So all of these examples are included in the publication, my Journal of Extension publication itself. It will also include all of those authors or publications from which these different evidence was found. One notable piece of literature was done by Bird in 2021, where he looked at 30 different nudges around financial aid or higher education. And in that literature review, what he did, or what they did, was to categorize the types of ways that people were nudged. So whether it be through text, email, a personal interaction with someone who is a gatekeeper or trustworthy, whether there was what the strategy was that person used, if they used a more conversational tone or if it felt kind of rigid in nature, and then also how they framed that messaging. So whether they did identity framing, specific identities, or whether it was around planning and scheduling prompts. So for example, saying the deadline for FAFSA is approaching soon. If you haven't completed it, here's how, or something like that. Or FAFSA is opening October 1st. Prepare these things to be ready for the opening date. So this was very useful to find out ways that nudges are being used in general. And so I wanted to know, beyond that larger scope of researcher knowledge, researcher publications, how specifically were cooperative extension professionals using nudges? And to no surprise, I found a quote by Becky Smith and al. From 2020 that recommended that extension professionals use simple, targeted nudges that they first pilot before they roll them out in financial education. They suggested that you use those nudges in collaboration or in concert with a financial education curriculum that supported the nudge and helped people get to the behavior or action change. And that it was very beneficial when it came to encouraging people to overcome their financial anxiety about something or their discomfort with with money or money conversations even. And some other ways that extension is being used, that nudges are being used in extension is in nutrition, and in promoting activity, health, and wellness, in finance, of course, as the Smith piece speaks to, but there are other examples of that as well, and encouraging people to take insurance action specifically in the realm of financial actions. So in this cooperative extension research, I also found that Warner et al. In 2019 gave some very specific directives on how extension might use nudges. And so the 5 key takeaways from that piece that was written in 2019 was: 1, nudges could help people understand particular problem, to know the timing of something, or or provide some context to a matter, and also to provide them some alternative choices to encourage their positive outcome. The second thing Warner's piece suggested was that informing clients about others who have been successful or who have taken that behavior, i.e. testimonials, etc., are effective in nudges. Thirdly, that it may be beneficial to create a strategy or provide some immediate incentive to people if they take an action. So it reduces that time between their knowledge or the nudge and them completing an action. And some strategies or tools might be creating a checklist or providing them with checklist, having some type of badge or award included in your curriculum, or providing them a certificate or something of that sort for completion, for example. The fourth suggestion from the Warner piece was to identify their passive defaults. So what would they otherwise kind of passively fall back into doing? And it might take some extra encouragement to get them over that default. So for example, a way to convert someone from their passive default to an action might be to offer them a resource, a new resource. So for example, if you have a toolkit, or you have some scenarios that you could provide them, you might tell them that will become available to them either after they register for an event so that they'll actually attend it, or after they've completed the evaluation, which we know those impacts are so important for us in extension to receive. The last of those suggestions from the Warner piece was to offer or suggest different choices and alternatives instead of just one. So that's back to that system 2 versus that system 1 kind of modeling. And an example of that might be to encourage them to take a pledge to complete an option at the end of a course. Okay. So in conjunction with this nudge literature, both in the research community as a whole and then specifically in extension, I also reviewed literature on this concept of the universal FAFSA. And so if you're going to create a nudge around something, it would be really good to know what's already happening in that dialogue in the research, and what problems or issues are yet to be tackled. What's the gap in that literature? And so the gap that I found was that many of the people who were writing about FAFSA and the concept of a universal FAFSA policy, most of that literature came from business schools. They came from schools of education, and researchers that kind of live in those domains or those disciplines. And what they found was, despite the many nudges or the fact that there are billions of dollars available, the reasons or the gaps for people getting the information and taking the action are really related to 3 things. This is how I summed them up. So 1, people have misinformation. There are a lot of common misbeliefs about the FAFSA process, about who is eligible, about what that means for your social standing in society, around shame or around privilege or access. And then secondly, just the sheer bureaucracy of dealing with the federal government, the inclusion of your IRS information, and providing that to a board of education, and all of the paperwork and steps that happen, both that are evident to the filer or the person who's filing for FAFSA, and the things that happen behind the scene that aren't so evident. There's a lot of bureaucracy happening in the process, and that makes people nervous or unsure. And then lastly, generally speaking, there are some opinions from critics that these universal FAFSA policies are typically underfunded, meaning they have a requirement that they might place on students or on parents or on counselors, however they place their state requirement. But beyond the law or the rule, there's not monies to support what they're asking or requiring those families, those students, or those high school counselors to do. And so that obviously leads to frustration and leads to people being more likely to opt out than to complete and engage in the form. This played out in Alabama in particular. There was a lot of talk about the challenges that people were facing as the rule was implemented here in the state of Alabama, and similar conversations played out among students and among families, frustrated parents across the nation. And a lot of that commentary made its way to local and national news outlets. Addressing that commentary, that frustration that was really understandable on parents' parts and on the part of career coaches or counselors who now had this added responsibility to touch every single high school student or high school senior related to FAFSA, whereas they may not have to have done that before. This was added on top of all the responsibilities they already had. And so this particular expert, in addressing those issues, Sarah says that states need to take a holistic approach to this universal FAFSA, that increasing the number of counselors in the schools, putting money behind that so that addresses that issue of that underfunding, providing them targeted training in this area, and then helping families to complete the FAFSA and improve the communication, i.e. nudging, all support the success of these types of programs. So with that in mind, all of the literature that was synthesized, in this article, we provide a list of recommendations on how someone might use nudging if they were interested in working with youth, parents, or counselors around college readiness. The first one is to have a simple plan. The strategy might include direct emails or direct text send out to the target audience, whether that be to students, to the parents, or to counselors, and provide as a supplement an informational workshop. So that's back to the Becky Smith 2022 article of making sure that if you do a nudge in extension education, that you're also providing some type of curriculum, whether it be in person, online, one-time series, it doesn't matter, but supporting nudges with curriculum. The next is increasing the student and parent awareness of FAFSA. So making that a pivotal central component of your approach or of your plan. And I put that specifically because I want to stress that a nudge isn't necessarily designed to tell someone what they should or should not do, but to encourage them to be informed. So increasing their awareness empowers them to make the informed decision. So that leads us to the next component of a simple plan, to empower those actors to make their informed decision. And in this case, it is either whether they'll ultimately complete FAFSA, whether they're opt out of FAFSA, and then naturally to provide support also to the people that support those families. So in this case, it would be high school counselors and career coaches. The second recommendation is to think intentionally about who your target is and deliver your nudges directly to them. So in this case, because in Alabama, the requirement was placed on our high school seniors, that is the target in our state through our extension programming. And to prepare upcoming juniors in their second semester of their junior year, we also include them at that point and in their summer leading into their junior year. We took the approach of selecting schools that were historically low completion rates. The U.S. Board of Education has a tracker on every single state down to the county level on which counties are performing above or below the goal for that state. And we also took the approach of focusing on schools that had free or reduced lunch or other federal benefits because those students are very likely to be eligible for FAFSA. The third strategy is to think strategically about who you will partner with. I know I've learned from experience in my 3 years as a state specialist that I can make the most beautiful program and make it open to the public, but if I don't partner strategically with a nonprofit or some organization, we may be talking to ourselves that day. And so in this program, some strategic partners that you might consider are others in your extension organization. So if you are, for example, I'm human sciences, I'm under the human sciences priority team, but I have partnered with 4-H and I have partnered with our community and workforce development to reach some of the audiences. So think about who you could partner with inside your extension organization to reach audiences. Naturally, you could partner with high schools, their administration, and also community colleges. And then other partners to think about, especially when it comes to college readiness or college going activities, might be your local board of education or service organizations, that help students go to college or remain in college. And then other organizations that have invested interest in that through their community work. They might be banks or credit unions, tax preparers, etc. There was an example in the literature that I reviewed where a tax preparer encouraged parents, if they had students as they were doing their taxes, they provided them the pamphlet or the nudge from that local extension program, which was a really cool partnership. The fourth is to think about your messaging and how you frame that messaging. So that's back to that table that I showed of the common ways that people were delivering their messaging. And some of them that rose to the top, and so they were most effective, were obviously the emails and the text, sending them directly to the student, but it coming from someone that they're familiar with or that they trust. Someone, one, they're likely to open the message, and two, that they're likely to trust their opinion or their suggestions. So that kind of ties back into who you're partnering with. So you may want to be partnering with that school counselor who can be the person to actually send out your nudges to the students that they work with. The next is messages. They could be framed to encourage people to make the best informed choice for themselves. So really highlighting in your tone. That's one that the table mentioned is conversational tone. But highlighting in your tone and your choice of words that you're really empowering them to make a choice instead of like dictating that FAFSA is open on October 1st. Apply by tomorrow, by a deadline to have aid. You might want to change that language to something more conversational that says that, did you know that there's, money available, free money available for college? Check out this link to find out more about those opportunities. And then the lastly is highlight those benefits, i.e. my example on checking out those benefits, and provide reminders about deadlines, and nudges are really good uses of them as well. You might target these initially to a broader group of people, but as the FAFSA year progresses, tailoring those nudges just only to the people who had yet not making an attempt or making a choice. And then lastly, supporting that nudge with that educational program. So those programs might look like a workshop, a single big event. For example, here in Alabama, one of our agents, she's very close to the person that does the excavation, and they blow up buildings for a living, and they do it they're having one in her county. And so they're going to do a blast into FAFSA, where the students are going to come to the blast site, and they're actually going to do an event before the blast. So students will get to see the blast, and then they'll learn about FAFSA while they're there. And then there's also obviously the option to do a series instead of a one-time event, if you feel that's most appropriate. Some key things you might cover, regardless of the type of program you do, whether it's a one-time workshop, a huge event, or a series, is you might want to address those common myths or common concerns, so reducing those passive defaults, providing some type of decision matrix or something, or a checklist that helps people make their decision more easily. And then additional things that you could provide other than checklists might be describing steps in a process, making them aware of deadlines or timelines, and then providing them resources for reputable places or people to assist them along the way. So here's an example of how all of that research played into the program we eventually created here in Alabama, called FAFSA Ready, Set, Go. So our program was designed to do three things, to provide a solution to all of those three problems that I talked about earlier, that provided a solution to addressing some of the bureaucracy. Of course, we can't manage all of that. We can't really change a federal process, but we can help people manage the bureaucracy around it, around that misinformation, addressing misinformation, and ultimately helping close the gap where counselors and parents feel that this burden has been placed upon them without the funds to really carry it through. So our three solutions to those things were providing resources for the students and families, doing these informative workshops directly with the students who have to fill out the FAFSA form. So that's why we targeted the workshops to the ones completing the form initially. And then providing those additional resources for counselors to help with that underfunding piece. In this nudge, the key component of the nudge is the media itself, the media components that we built itself. And so those components I built in collaboration and great support from our marketing team here at Auburn University. And it includes graphics for those educators to use in the nudges that they send out for us. It includes workshop materials and a complete outreach kit. And so I didn't include a picture of it, but I want to speak a little bit more to that outreach kit. In that outreach kit, there is a 5-page kit that includes all of these pre-written scripts that we provide to the counselors. We include the month or time frame that that particular message or nudge should be pushed out through their email to their students. And we tell them options of which graphics might go along with that. And we work with them to do a promotional event in conjunction with the nudges. So our events, our workshop is called the Ready, Set, Go. And in our 1 hour, 1.5 hour workshop, typically 1.5 hour, it's got longer. It's gotten longer this year since the FAFSA process has changed on a national level this year. But we cover 4 things. Getting ready for FAFSA, which is an overview where we talk about those misinformation, where we address the misinformation. And step 2, get set, is where we provide those items to reduce barriers. So we provide checklists and we help them jump over the hurdle from preparation to completion by reducing the amount of time it takes them to complete the FAFSA form through this preparation process. The next thing we cover is completing the FAFSA, the Go component. And so we walk them through all the steps of FAFSA and help reduce some of that financial stress that was spoken to in the Smith 2020 piece by making them aware and literally showing them all of the screens before they have to go and log into the system. And so they aren't surprised by that. They're prepared. And then lastly, that component of getting help. So providing them these additional resources, because our workshop is only 1.5 hours. And there are other programs that we do. This isn't our full-time job or commitment. And so we do direct them to agencies, nonprofit agencies in our state that help students complete FAFSA for free and provide them resources, especially parents, resources on things like commercial financial services, i.e. those organizations that reach out to you around your child's junior or senior year and offer to help you prepare for scholarships or prepare for FAFSA for a fee, right? For a fee of some kind. So we really, I noticed that I got a lot of questions from parents around that concept of these financial aid services that were reaching out to them and quoting them for their services. And so there are pieces to help them guide through that process if they choose to use a financial services agency. All of those pieces that I kind of spoke to, they live on our website. In total, there are 21 publications that I've created as a part of this nudge campaign and the curriculum or the program that supports it. Some key pieces in that, amongst those 21 are the decision tool that helps people really walk through whether they're eligible for FAFSA or not. There are a lot of different categories of eligibility, and it can get really confusing just reading it on the FAFSA website. But I created a simple yes and no questionnaire, a decision tool that helps them get from I'm interested in FAFSA to yes or no, I'm eligible for FAFSA, to ultimately answer that question. So that's a key component on the website. And then, of course, all of our downloadable checklists. There is a 16-page comprehensive book. But if that book is overwhelming, there are also micro learning opportunities, one-pagers that make it easy for people to address a specific question that they have. Along with the toolkit that I spoke to, the media toolkit for the counselors, and then other downloadable materials for the counselors, all located on that website. And they are currently in Spanish and English. So that's my overview.